Hey everybody, welcome back to the 80s Slashers YouTube channel. In this video, we will be going back to take a look at the year 1984 and all of the slasher films that were released that year. Now, it's widely considered that the golden age of the slasher film was between 1978 and 1984. So that would make this the final year that we will be looking at within this series that can be considered as part of the golden age of the slasher. Now, from my opinion, looking at the years prior to 84 and the years after, I would have to agree that 1984 is probably the final year that can be looked at as classic. Now, that's not to say that, some of the later years in the 80s aren't solid and have, many really good slasher films, because they do. It just seems like after this year, the following years just kind of have a different feel or like a different tone from like the 80s slashers. From the early 80s slashers. 84 feels like it was just kind of closing the door on these style of slashers, when I'm usually talking about these, there's always like, you always mention like, oh, this is an early 80s slasher or a late 80s slasher. And that they are distinct in their, like I said, in like the style and the tone, the feel of them. And 84 has a touch of, both, I feel, but this is probably firmly in the camp of, considered an early 80s slasher. So now, besides being like this, the swan song for the golden age of slashers, 1984 is one of the most important years in all of the 80s slasher genre as well. Aside from having a ton, like a really good amount of just fun slashers, like really solid fun slashers, 84 was also responsible for many important aspects that, the genre would later be remembered for. We have the introduction of, one of the most beloved final guys in the entire genre in Tommy Jarvis. We have the death of one of the genre's most iconic villains with Jason Voorhees. We have the introduction of a new icon in horror with Freddy Krueger. And we saw a film in 1984 that was solely responsible for almost crippling the entire genre, at least for an entire year. It really brought the genre to a standstill. But we'll more on that later. We will touch on that a little later. So yeah, 1984. It's a really interesting year, and it's one that I'm excited to talk about. But now, before we get any deeper into the discussion of the year, let's just take a quick look at a brief overview of the year, just so we know what we're talking about here. So, yeah, 1983. Now, I have the total number of slashers released this year. I have it at 13. Now again, I've said this in all the previous videos, I'll say it again, these are the films that I consider to be 80s slashers, I'm sure there's other films that people, are wondering like, why is this omitted, why isn't this here? And, I may view it as more of, just a typical horror film or more of a thriller, it's obviously very subjective, but there's 13 films that I'm aware of that, I feel fit within the formula of an 80s slasher film. So yeah, so 13 films. That's up until from 80 to 84 now. This is the fewest releases so far. 80, 84 had, I'm sorry, 83 had 14 films. And that was the fewest. So it's been declining for sure. In the 80, 81, 82, there was, you were getting up around 20 films per year. And then, went down to 14, and now we have 13 films. Now, the approximate box office sales, again, I was only, of the 13 films, I was only able to get information for 4 of them. And those 4 films totaled over $61 million at the box office, which is about 157 million adjusted for inflation, which is a lot of money for the slasher genre. The year prior, again, 83 had a smaller sampling size for the information that I had, but it's almost it's over double the box office sales for 84. Now there is a reason for that, and we will get into it. But 84 was a successful year in my opinion, for sure at the box office. And we'll see here we have number of holiday themed films. There's 3. Like I said, that's one of the themes I've been looking at every year just to see what films that have like a Christmas in the title, or a Friday the 13th, a graduation day, a prom night. Something that has like a holiday or an event. It's just kind of part of the formula. And 83 had none, I believe, and 84 has 3, so it's a good bounce back for that, because those are those are popular for whatever reason. You stick a holiday in the title of a slasher film, and it seems to do well. And number of franchise films 2. So yeah, so if like I say, if we take a look at the 83 versus the 84, like I said, total slashers released 14 versus 13. So close, same about, same, but this is the lowest so far. So that's interesting. And then the box office sales, 83 had just under 28 million, 84 had 61. And it's about, like I said, the sampling size for 83 was 3, 4, 5 films that I could find, and 84 is 4 films. So about the same amount. It's always the biggest drawing one. So the ones that did the best, the top 4 or 5 films. And as you can see, 84, the top 4 or 5 films over doubled what the top 4 or 5 films from 83 did. So, yeah, well, again, we'll get into that, and you'll see why, obviously, but yeah, way more successful year at the box office. And like I said, in terms of the holiday themed films and the franchise films, they kind of returned to form here. 83 was a weird year, and like it had it had direct or shot on video slasher films. It had made for TV horror films, slasher films, but it didn't have any holiday themed films. It didn't have a Friday the 13th film. It didn't have any franchise films like Nightmare, Halloween, or Friday, which is the only year. 83 was the only year that never had one of those, a film from any 3 of those franchises. So 84 we had 2 of them. So which obviously helps the box office there. So yeah, so kind of an interesting year for sure. Yeah, before we get any further, let's just see what the films are. Let's take a look and yeah, see what the films are. So the first film released in 1984 was actually Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Yeah. And then next film we had was The Initiation. That was followed by Fatal Games. Then we had Disconnected. And then we had another. Disconnected was a low budget slasher. And then we have another low budget slasher in Splatter University. And then up next we have The Mutilator. And after that, we had Satan's Blade. And following that, we had Shadows Run Black, which, as you can see, stars a very young Kevin Costner, which is kind of funny. Some of these, a lot of these A-list celebrities got their start in the slasher films. You know, you got Kevin Costner, Kevin Bacon, Tom Hanks, Johnny Depp. There's a lot of them. It's funny. So after that we had Rocktober Blood. And then following that, we have Silent Madness, which just got an excellent Blu-ray release from Vinegar Syndrome. And then getting near the end of the year, we close it out with a few holiday films here. So the first one is, of course, Silent Night, Deadly Night. And then A Nightmare on Elm Street was released. And the last film of the year is a British film, British slasher, Don't Open Till Christmas. When you look at all these titles, you really see it's that's a solid year. That is a lot of really good films. And there's barely any weak films in there, the ones that don't get talked about the most, I guess, you see Shadows Run Black, Disconnected, they don't get talked about too much, but if you're familiar within like the horror community, a lot of these films are just a really strong set of films, in my opinion, and they're fun films. Like there's just all these films have some element that just makes them fun, whether they're a franchise film with Freddy or Jason, a Christmas theme film. Rocktober Blood is just like a musical type slasher. Fatal Games is fun. Splatter University has that low budget zany charm. It's just a really fun year, in my opinion. Now if we take a look, like I said, in terms of like the holiday themed films, as you see, we have there's 3 on the list here. So we have Friday the 13th. I always stick that in. But then we have the 2 Christmas ones, Silent Night, Deadly Night, and Don't Open Till Christmas. So, obviously Christmas heavy, but still fun to see, and glad to see that those are back, because I always enjoy the holiday themed films. And this is 84 is actually the last year that we got another one of the 3D films in Silent Madness. In 1982, we had Friday the 13th Part 3, and I guess the 80s 3D revival, was it was in the horror genre for the most part, and it was 82, 83, and it didn't last too long. And 84 is kind of near the end of the cycle. So but yeah, Silent Madness, really fun. I like that movie. It looks good in 3D. Like I said, the new Vinegar Syndrome Blu-rays looks fantastic, and so that's fun. And like I said, these are some of the things that make this, in my opinion, that make this like a really important year. You're getting a 3D slasher, and then of course, we get another, like I said, important aspect of this is we get the introduction of little Tommy Jarvis played by Corey Feldman. And he, went on to star in, three total of the franchise of the Friday the 13th films in the franchise. And, this is the year that it started off. And, obviously fans liked the character enough that they kept bringing the character back and cast different actors. But yeah, it's always nice. I love Tommy Jarvis. It's one of my favorite characters. So, yeah, so that's a good introduction this year. And then of course in the same film we get you know, the death of Jason Voorhees. I guess technically it is the death of Jason Voorhees. We all know it continues on, of course, but it's the death of human Jason Voorhees, I guess, until, obviously he's resurrected and zombie Jason or whatever you want to call him. But it was billed as that, the final chapter. Like, I believe they had plans that this was going to, or some people at least had plans that it was going to be the final film, and they're going to kill Jason. And of course, producers, whoever, obviously decided to to bring him back eventually. But yeah, it was a big thing. It was a big deal. We're gonna kill off Jason Voorhees after 4 films. So kind of a big deal. But as big as those are, an even bigger deal in '84 was the introduction of A Nightmare on Elm Street and its main villain Freddy Krueger, who would go on to become one of the biggest icons in all of horror. You put him right up there with Jason and Michael Myers and Chucky. Leatherface. There's a Mount Rushmore, but if there was a Mount Rushmore of horror, Freddy Krueger's face would be on there. And this is '84 is the year it all started. Yeah, when that film came out, like obviously word of mouth got around. Just I feel it's just the concept of that movie, like just the idea of a killer getting you in your dreams, and like that's terrifying. There's nothing you can do. Like if you're asleep, everyone has to sleep. Yeah, at least Jason, you have a chance if you know how to run. You can outrun him and don't run upstairs and don't run in the basement. You have a chance with Jason and Michael and whatnot, but Eddie, everyone's got to sleep, and I think just that the whole idea and concept of it when it was first introduced is just it terrified people. It struck a nerve, and it just launched a new icon. And he had obviously the different look and the finger blades and the smart aleck, the one-liners and whatnot, which came a little more in some later films, but he was a little bit in the first film. So '84, very important year. But one of the biggest things that probably occurred in this year, that I say made it so important, was the release of Silent Night, Deadly Night. Now, if I'm sure most of you are maybe familiar with the controversy, but this film caused a big controversy in 1984. So basically, what happened when, if you don't know what the film is, basically it's the killer is dressed as Santa, and he's going around killing people, like in a typical slasher film, but he's dressed in a Santa outfit, with the full head to toe outfit, the beard, and the promotion for this film, they ran a TV spot. I think it's like I'll put it on here. It's like 30 seconds, and they aired this during regular TV broadcasts. It ran during the commercials for shows like Three's Company and Little House on the Prairie. So kids were watching, Little House on the Prairie, and when it went to commercial break, they would see this 30-second clip of Santa Claus killing people, and it terrified children apparently, and it outraged parents. And so almost immediately, protests broke out. People were picketing, going to movie theaters and going to shopping malls, like where the cinemas were located, with signs, standing there chanting and singing Christmas carols. It was in newspapers. People were, it was, the media was following all these protests, and Yeah, it got really, really out of hand. People were writing letters, you know. I'll put some on the screen here. You see, like, there's a couple concerned parents talking about, um, little, like, children trusting Santa Claus and not seeing him kill people, and how they were terrified. They were refusing to sit on Santa's lap, and all this stuff. Um, Even a letter from Hollywood actor Mickey Rooney, says, "How dare they? How dare they make a movie giving Santa Claus a gun to kill someone? The scum that the scum who made this movie should be run out of town." That's from Mickey Rooney, actor from Hollywood. The same Mickey Rooney, of course, who later went on to star in Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 5, The Toy Maker. So yeah, that's kind of funny. So this caused a big stink, a big stir, and within 6 days of it being released, um, the advertisements in, like, papers and movie posters, they were pulled. And within 10 days of it being released, the film was pulled from theaters. So it only, I think it had like a 10-day run in the theaters before it got yanked. And it really upset parents. It just, yeah, it was a big controversy. It caused a big thing. It eventually got re-released in 1985, and they used a different ad campaign. Instead of showing Santa killing people, they used the campaign of, "Oh, this movie was pulled from theaters, it's controversial." They used that to get people's attention. Um, so yeah, that was a that was that all happened in '84. So this was an important year. Um, yeah. So let's All right. So enough of Silent Night for now. Like I said, we'll touch on it a little bit more, but let's just take a look at the release schedule here, just so we know what we're talking about. So really interesting. So when you look on here, nothing was released from January to March. No films. So in the first film of the year, like I said, that got released was Friday the 13th, the final chapter, not until April. So that's really interesting. I know, looking at past years, January, February, March, they're usually for sure the slowest time for horror movies to get released. Obviously come, September, August, summer, and into the fall, heading into the holiday season. It's when the horror season seems to pick up for sure, obviously. But we'd never seen it like this before. January, February, March, like, just nothing. And then April, it picks up a little bit. Nothing in May again, June. So it's a really, really slow start to the year, like the slowest we've seen. But once June hit, then we're starting to see some pretty continuous releases. You get 2 in July, 2 in August, in September, 2 in October, 2 in November and December. So, and they're, like I said, these are all really good films in my opinion. They're really solid. So yeah, like, just like every year, it builds up, slow start, and then it ramps up at the end of the year. And then, usually the next year you go in and it, starts the cycle again. The beginning of the year is going to be slower until it picks up again. So is that going to happen in 1985? Well, I know what happens in 1985, and I'm sure some of you do as well. But again, my theory, my opinion is, it has to do with Silent Night, Deadly Night. But again, we'll get into that a little later in this video, and we will definitely talk about it when we do the 1985 video. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, like, it's just kind of an interesting year. Like, when you break them down into blocks, from all the way from January to April, you get 2 films, which, not a lot, and then, May to August block, you get 5 films in there with Fatal Games, Disconnected, Splatter University, The Mutilator, and Satan's Blade. So that block, the middle third of the year was pretty good, pretty solid. And then, as you would expect, September to December block is 6 films. That's great. That's a lot of slashers going to the theaters. So yeah, overall, like I said, a solid release schedule. Obviously back heavy, but once it got going in June, it really picked up, I think. Yeah, so let's move on and let's just take a look at some of the stats for this year. So first we'll take a look at the budget. So like I said, what do I have here? Seven information for 7 films. So half the films. These are a lot of the bigger ones, So interesting is Friday and Nightmare both had the same budget, which is 1.8 million. So that's a decent sized budget. Now, in years past, we've seen some slasher films with like $4 or $5 million budgets. So it's these are the two big films, and they're just under $2 million. That's a solid budget, but I'm surprised that there's not more. Those 2 films in particular, that they didn't cost a little more to make, 'cause they both look great. They're both really well done. So yeah, and then Silent Night, Deadly Night comes in third here at just 750,000, which is about right for that film. I'm actually surprised it's that high, actually, because it's not. It looks like a film that could have been made for less. Yeah, and then again, Silent Madness, 600,000. I'm surprised. I'm really surprised at that budget, because it's, like I said, a 3D film, and I don't have the number offhand, but I believe Friday the 13th Part 3 had quite a. The budget for that film was quite a bit larger than 600,000, I believe. So yeah, that's kind of surprising. I guess they spent it all on the 3D effects and not much else, I guess. And then the Mutilator, 450,000, which seems about right for that film. And then, like I said, the 2 low budget films, Splatter University and Disconnected, at around 50,000 each, which sounds about right for those, I guess. So yeah, so pretty lower in terms of budgets, lower end, I think. There wasn't a lot of money spent on these films. So I don't know if, at this point, they've been in theaters for a long time, and they're probably just being cautious with where they spend their money, I guess. I don't know. Now, if we move on to the box office, this is, like I said, I only have 4 films I can find information for. But this is where it gets interesting. Look at this. The first 2 films. Friday makes almost $33 million, and Nightmare on Elm Street makes $25.5 million. That's unbelievable. That is a big box office haul. Like those 2 films beat 1983 had just under $28 million for all of the 4 or 5 films I could find. And, Friday beat that all by itself, and Nightmare almost beat that. So yeah, these 2 films drew. These 2 films drew people to the theaters. And another interesting thing is Silent Night, Deadly Night. It made $2.5 million, and it had a 10-day run. So the controversy, it drew people. It obviously it wasn't in the theater long. If that would have stayed in the theater for, I don't know what the typical length of a theater run in the early mid 80s was, but if it would have stayed in for a month or a couple months, who knows how well it would have done at the box office. I know it's a Christmas film, so after Christmas is over, it probably dies down, but yeah, it's very good return. The budget on that was, like I said, 750,000, so they made their money back and some. So yeah, and the Mutilator, 400,000 at box office. If you remember, the budget for that was 450,000. So Buddy Cooper, the director, lost money, which is too bad, because that's a fun film. But I think he said he made some money on, I don't know, VH or what. So I think it worked out okay for him, maybe. Yeah, so it's pretty interesting. Like I said, I think these numbers shows that at this time there was still a desire for these films, at least certain types of films, like the franchise films were going as strong as ever, and if you had a good holiday themed film, like a Christmas slasher, even with all the controversy, it still did well. So yeah, I know at this point, 84, the slashers were definitely oversaturated. People were probably getting sick of them because they were still putting out quite a few of them a year. But people, if you made a good film, people would go to see it. It seemed. So yeah, pretty interesting year. So let's just move on. Let's just kind of wrap it up with some final thoughts here. So where are we at this point? 88, the build up of the genre, obviously up until the peak. Peaked in 81. 82, had a slight decline, at least in terms of box office and a lot of budget films. A lot of people were probably just trying to get in, and make these films and make some money. That was the primary objective, not making a good film, making money. There was a lot of the market was definitely saturated in 82 with some films that probably wouldn't slasher films that haven't really stood the test of time. 83 we kind of went back to some solid films, and I consider 83 a bounce back year. Did pretty well at the box office, with less titles released, and yeah, I think it led into this year, 1984. So by the time 84 hits, I feel we're kind of in like a second wave maybe of a slasher craze. 83 was building up to it, and I feel like this is kind of the peak of the second wave. It's just the films getting released this year. It's just really fun. But again, like I said, a lot of them were just have just become really important, just to the overall history of the genre. Like I said, this is the year we get some 3D slashers. We get, the introduction of Tommy Jarvis. We get the death of Jason Voorhees, and we get the introduction of Freddy Krueger. It seemed this year, from the carryover from 83 up to 84, it seemed that things were looking up. They were going in the right direction. The interest was there. Then Silent Night, Deadly Night hit, and in my opinion, the controversy that this film caused, I think it had filmmakers slam the brakes on these films for a bit. I think there was a tentativeness to make these films, because the parents were upset. You don't want to make a film and have it boycott it and protest it at the box office. And it 100%, in my opinion, of course, affected 1985 in the genre going forward. And again, what happened in 1985? Well, we will discuss that in the 1985 video. So again, stay tuned for that. But it's clear that the genre after this year will change a little bit. And I think when people say that the golden age of the slasher is 78 to 84, I really think that I think that's an apt description. I feel like this is kind of putting kind of like a bookend on the early 80s slasher, and then going into 85 with whatever happens in 85, and then moving into the late 80s slashers. It's not quite the same after that. So this is, for me, for sure, this is the end of the golden age. But besides that fact, and all that stuff, 1984, it's, in my opinion, this is a great year for slashers, with a ton of films that I really enjoy. And I think it's definitely one of the better years of the genre. It's a smaller sampling size. Only 13 films, but they're a lot of fun. If you're a fan of 80s slashers, it doesn't get much better than this year. This is definitely a highlight for me. I like this year quite a bit. So yeah, that's it, guys. 1984 year in slashers. So like I do always, next video I do will be a top five, my top five films of 1984. So that'll be up next. So stay tuned for that. If you haven't yet, and you wanna check out my other year and slashers videos, I'll put up on the screen here the playlist for those. So obviously we have 1980 through 84 done, up to this point. And if you're curious to go back to 1983, I'll put my top five films of '83 on the screen as well, and I'll link everything below in the description as well. All right, so that's it. So yeah, until next time. All right, see ya.